You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss level 10 characters. Well, hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm feeling powerful today, Jody.
As well you should, because today's episode focuses on playing Shadowdark with level 10 characters. Matt, you did just this, so take us to the table.
Indeed, I did, Jody. So let me, instead of setting the scene with a bunch of window dressing in terms of level 10 characters and their powers, let me just give you the setup that I gave to the players instead. And we can dive into this topic a bunch in a minute. After years of delving into the barrow maze, a party found a teleportation circle that led to an extra-dimensional space. Rebuffed by a fell demon, the party retreated, but of course, rumors spread throughout the town of Fellcrest. Eventually, the most capable and powerful adventurers in town assembled to uncover what lies beyond the circle, inside of this pocket dimension. You all made your way through the dungeon, which has been cleared and picked clean over the many, many delves. And eventually you arrive at that teleportation circle, each of you stepping in, feeling your body pulled from one place and shunted into another. All of you appear in an antechamber, standing on a raised platform. Two large braziers stand on the north and south wall with a massive green flame emitting eerie light throughout the chamber. In front of you, to the west, a massive set of obsidian and iron double doors, each with a roughly rectangular depression in it. There are 2 points of egress in this room, one to the north and one to the south, each blocked by a large iron door that stands closed. The northern door bears all manner of graffiti of chaos, 8-pointed stars and stylized skulls of the blood god, and the door to the south has very little graffiti on it. But above the door is a symbol you all know way too well, a half skull made of blackened bone. However, the most interesting part of the room is standing at the bottom of the platform in front of you. An enormous demonic entity with several arms, claws, and teeth protruding from them. It makes no attempt at speaking. There is no reaction roll. It immediately charges. Roll initiative.
I believe that is what we call a fast start as we gather around the fire and dive into the fires of chaos and the heat of battle. All right, let's dive into this thing. And at the top, I just want to address this as we get into these 10th level adventurers that dove into this combat and the resultant area. Man, people online mention 10th level Shadowdark or 20th level modern D&D equivalent or whatever. And this goes way back to some early days of D&D, certainly anything in the modern era. And I mean, the undercurrent of discussion is always just this GM's fear of 10th level. Oh my God, what if the play, and it's the wringing of hands and the gnashing of teeth. And oh my God, what are we going to do? And you confronted that demon, fear, head on. So man, I am just anxious to pull this thing apart because I was bummed, but I wasn't able to sit in on this particular group to get the player experience. So, you know, I'm just here for the ride to facilitate your experience on running a lengthy session at level 10 and really putting these characters through their paces. So how did you get there? Give us the setup and get us into the background to getting there beyond the awesome narrative you just provided.
So some of the nuts and bolts here. So we used existing characters. So there were 6 players, and we ended up, the session was about 6 hours, and we started the session by, at the table, leveling up existing characters to level 10. They didn't get any additional items, I think there was one character that didn't have a magic weapon, and that felt unsporting, so I think we rolled up kind of a basic magic weapon for that character, but otherwise, everybody had the items that they already had. We've talked about this on previous shows, that these characters were already well and truly on their way to full sets of very good armor, weapons, etc. So we leveled up existing characters, and that was super fun. In Shadowdark, level ups don't take that long. The thing that took the longest was folks choosing spells. Of course, that's always going to be one of those kind of time sinks. But other than spells, it was pretty seamless. And just a little bit of a call out here from the top. We'll probably talk about this in the future, but we had one of our 2 kind of playtest barbarians. So we created a barbarian class. Both you and I, Jody, we kind of diverged in terms of the design of both those classes. And so this was my personal kind of design that you deviated from. And so I think hopefully on a future show we can talk about the barbarian. But it was also cool to see a class that we had designed rise to level 10. So just as a little addendum there. As far as the dungeon was concerned, it was very Zelda-like. So, you had to get these 2 tablets and put them in the big door, but you saw the quote-unquote boss door from the beginning. So you put those 2 tablets. One of them's in the north, one of them's in the south. You get the 2 tablets, you put them in the door. And the goal of the session was to get through that door and find the great tablet of chaos and undeath that is kind of the big MacGuffin of the Barrow Maze. Now, in the north and in the south, there were mini-bosses, but kind of big mini-bosses. So I'm sure we'll get to those. The characters and players had, I think, a pretty good time in this very combat-heavy session. And that's kind of the setup. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to know about what we did before we kind of dive into maybe these encounters?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that it was combat heavy and that there's some reasons for that, but it also made for in terms of the show itself. And if you're only going to play one session, albeit, a longer session, and you're going to get a 10th level character, you want to swing your sword, right? You want
Sure.
This echoes a lot of the information on the internet that's out there of how to not be an antagonistic GM is to let your characters do the cool thing. So I think that was just smart on your part to go, we're going to fight a whole bunch. And that is, I think most of the worry I hear from people is about exactly that of once I get in combat, how do I honor the false god and, keep things balanced and interesting. So
Sure.
I think actually we should just press forward and let's get to that first encounter where they went to get the first of the 2 tablets needed to unlock the giant door so they could get the 3rd tablet, if I'm understanding correctly.
No, so Jody, this is tablet. It's a tableau of tablets, you might say.
One might say that. Oh no.
So the first encounters actually happens immediately, right? So there's a combat encounter that I set up. I knew it was going to be easier than the other 2 encounters, but I'll be honest with you, I needed a combat encounter right from the start to then... I had a couple of places where I was going to either dial up or dial down the difficulty on those other 2 encounters, and I was going to use this initial encounter to set those 2 things and then let them be. So I don't like fudging with things during an encounter. That's not my style, certainly not fudging die rolls and stuff like that. But I will, in this case, I'm going to tailor those 2 encounters based on what I see the characters do in this first one. So the first one is in a 6-player characters versus 1 demon. And I just kind of stole a few demonic things from the various demons in the Shadowdark core rulebook, but I kind of based it on a Glabrizo, which is my favorite personal demon. I think the name is cool, and they are awesome. So the 2 pincers and the crush and things like that made sense with the model we were using, so super fun. And I will say, just as an addendum to this, the only spell that I did not allow to be chosen was Wish, because Wish actually can undermine everything we're trying to do here. And I also just told the players, like, look, like there are spells in the rulebook that can kind of do things that probably aren't super fun. So there might have been a little bit of players checking themselves, and we'll talk about this, I think, as the episode goes on. But I wouldn't say that it affected the outcome of any of these encounters. So the first encounter, they dispatched this demon pretty easily, but it was a good opportunity for me to kind of see where everyone was and what everyone could do. And it was, I think, like a round and a half, maybe 2 rounds of combat, and we were done. And then they kind of solved some minor puzzles in this antechamber, and then we moved on to the north.
How many players did you have here?
So we originally were going to have 8. Again, this was one of the reasons that I needed those dials, but we had 6. So that is kind of a full table. 8 was going to be pushing it. Very
Just
much so.
in terms of physical space.
In terms of physical space. I was happy to run for 8. 6 players. I loved it. I love the fact that Shadowdark allows for a larger table, and you can do it even when the characters are higher level, because you don't have those rounds of I roll 4 attacks, I have an action and a bonus action, etc. Which for folks who love that style of play, there are of course games for that. But we got through encounters basically in an hour, even though they were reasonably complicated, or an hour each, even though they were reasonably complicated, and we had 6 10th level characters.
I think that's awesome, and hopefully assuages at least a little of people's fear of that you can get through this stuff. 6 level 10 players, that's quite a few.
I mean, an hour is maybe people will sort of be, oh my gosh, an hour for an encounter. I mean, but our encounters are reasonably in depth and more.
Well, I mean, we just did an episode of Irangle Session that was a combat encounter, and you know, the whole thing was in combat rounds, and so that was for 4 hours. So an hour, that's nothing. You know what? You mentioned the barbarian really quickly. Just again, I want people to be able to kind of get their head around what you were dealing with here, and I know some of the party makeup. So can you, off the top of your head, remember all 6 characters?
My gosh.
So we have the barbarian and.
So we had, starting from my left, I'm closing my eyes so I can visualize the table. Starting from my left, we had a level 10 priest, a level 10 wizard, another level 10 wizard, a level 10, I don't know why I'm saying the level. We already know the level, but I'm going to keep doing it. A level 10 fighter, another level 10 fighter, and rounding things out, a level 10 barbarian. So no thief, which actually I think is maybe something, I don't know that we're going to get to it in this episode, but is something kind of interesting. I do feel like thieves as wizards get more powerful, thieves might tend to need a little bit of niche protection. When you can cast Pass Wall, for instance, you can avoid lots of things and lots of traps and whatnot. So, just as a kind of note there. But yeah, that was the table.
A priest, 2 wizards, 2 fighters, and our homespun barbarian taking it on. All right, so they bypass the Glabrezo and move on to the first of the 2 side chambers. Is that correct?
Indeed. They go north.
And what awaited them to the north?
What awaited them to the north was a demon summoning ritual. Ooh. And to get through this very quickly, it's kind of a, your normal rectangular room with in the back there was like a stone dais with a sarcophagus in which was a tablet. It was, of course, trapped, so more on that in a second, maybe. But the actual combat encounter that took place here was between a bunch of kind of beefed-up berserkers from the core rulebook using the wonderful bookmark that we talked about in our previous episode from Michael Putlack's zine to kind of augment some of their abilities and specifically their hit points and attacks. What I did was I rolled a d4, and in that many rounds, I was going to have whatever was going to come through the portal, which was just, spoiler alert, a Balor. And it was going to come through, and things were going to get real spicy really fast. But if they cleaned up all of the cultists and all of the kind of chaos berserkers before that, it was great. There were, however, 2 very large chaos berserkers that were Yeah.
Gonna pack your lunch. It's gonna take a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big bags of hit points that hit hard.
So I'm dying to know, what was the D4 roll? I have really struggled with D4 timers. What was?
I don't like them. I just gone. I don't like them. I felt like here I was like, screw it. Let's have some fun. There's a bunch of random stuff happening. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. Let's just roll it. We rolled a 1.
All right.
So at the top of the next round, somebody or something is going to come through, and it did, but not without some amount of kind of hand wringing and tactics from the players.
So it was. How did initiative work? Let's talk about that at level 10. So in this room, you had the beefed up berserkers. Do you remember what level they were off the top of your head?
8
level. Oh, snikey. So 2 level 8 critters, and then
6 level 4 berserkers.
6 level 4 berserkers, and those were the ones casting the ritual?
They were all casting the ritual. So per my ruling, I was like, one person gotta be chanting, otherwise this round won't count. So at first it was all 6 of them, but if they're engaged in combat, they aren't chanting. So one of them is going to have to kind of sit out and just do the chanting.
So when the players saw the 1 come down on the D4, did they just go like, let's just go full nuclear and kill as much as we can before the thing pops open? How did they approach the encounter? What I'm really wanting to know is, did they dive into their level 10 bags of tricks here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, the Shadowdark characters, when they reach level 10, at least in my experience, they quite simply hit harder and are just even better at what they were already good at. So like a level 10 fighter can't do some unbelievably crazy thing unless you've allowed it through like learning downtimes or something like that. They're not gaining like a long list of abilities, right? So the fighters did fighter things. They ran in and they beat the crap out of individual berserkers, right? However, our wizard and our priest, they leveraged their spells. So our priest decided to dimension door with I think a willing target back to the dais to kind of inspect the tablet sarcophagus. And so that created some interesting polarity. And so some people are on one side of the room, some people are on the other side. And then, I think the interesting thing about wizards in particular at level 10 is that if you choose certain spells, you are just more likely to do certain things. So let me make that a little bit more concrete, right? One of our wizards had advantage on lightning bolt, which meant that he had a consistent output of 3d6 damage in a line. And that is just like it's a really solid way to truck out some damage. And you can basically always hit 2 targets with a line. That's how lines work. So, you're basically guaranteed to cast it. I should say that basically everybody started with luck tokens, and our luck token rules are pretty they're pretty lax. I mean, you got to quote unquote pay for a luck token in these Sunday sessions, but it was only like 50 gold, and by the time you're where we are, that ain't much.
Yep, that's pocket change.
So the consistency of that spell was such that wizard player character was doing a lot of that, and then our other wizard seemed to have much more kind of like utility spells, much less combat focused spells. I'll just jump to the kind of the big thing that happened in this room was our halfling wizard. She cast silence. And silence hit a near-size cube. The room was not near-size. It was larger than near-size. So I kind of ruled that it hit the center of the room in between some of these columns that I put out on the on the battle map that I had set up. So that endangered the ritual tremendously. And I had to roll to see if any of the berserkers actually recognized, do we recognize that this is happening? And so I rolled a d20 in each of their turns, and a couple of them ended up recognizing and stepping out. One in particular, one of the big chunky berserkers stepped out of the silenced area. It was very interesting though, because what I saw was that the wizards in particular, and to a slightly lesser extent, the priest, just had a larger menu of options, right? Like, and I think that this is just true of all levels in Shadowdark and so many other D20 fantasy games where, you know, if you're a fighter, you just hit stuff really hard. But you don't have a whole lot of flourish, a whole lot of special abilities. And so that was even more exacerbated, but I don't feel like the fighters felt that they were hamstrung. It is fun to hit things very hard and have like a plus 11 or 12 to your attack.
Yeah, I mean, even some of these beefy boys that, you know, you're throwing at them, some of the demons you mentioned have ACs of like, oh my gosh, that's an armor class of 19. Yeah, when you're plus 11, you're still well above half the time. It should be clobbering this thing for a respectable amount of damage if you're a fighter. Not 3d6, but you also aren't risking, you know, a 5% chance of spontaneously combusting. So, but wait a minute. Silence really messes with the ritual. That great call on the part of that wizard. And this is wizards doing wizard stuff to me because that's a tier 2 spell, man. That's not, you know, that's not a deleter. That's not a disintegrator. That's not a pillar of stone. That's a good old meat and potatoes. Get up to level 3 and you're good to go there. I mean, great call. And I knowing this player, actually, that's really fun. That's an interesting evolution of play. This person came to us as a new-ish player and certainly new to Shadowdark, and spent a lot of time with me in Caves of Chaos before delving into the Barrow Maze and leveling out of the Caves of Chaos.
Totally.
So I love that's how that went down. So they cast silence on the ritual, but you're saying it didn't stop the ritual. The ritual still happened?
It didn't stop the ritual. Now, I want to actually take a moment to address something that happened kind of at the table. So, Finga, our halfling wizard, was the highest in the initiative. So we use individual initiative in our games, which is very important. And I actually want to call out here that I think in a level 10 game, individual initiative ended up being a net positive. Because I just don't really like the potential for, and this can happen in individual initiative, but it is way more unlikely. I don't like it when all the players go and then all the monsters go. I find that to be simple, but also distasteful because it can be so disruptive in especially in a level 10 scenario. Like that would have trivialized this encounter in ways that I can't even necessarily consider. It's perhaps this is just a shortcoming of my GMing, but it's just not what I was interested in. And I continue to enjoy individual initiative like is present in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So because of this, because I use static DCs, the ritual was on DC 21, the hidden DC, I call it. The maximum extreme. And so DC 21, I think I believe had like a 22 or a 23 initiative. So she was the only player character that was going to go before this silenced or this ritual was going to happen. And like I said, one of the berserkers had stepped out of the silenced area. It's great. And I was very lucky to have one chanting berserker still alive. And I was like, yes, it's going to happen. But then the realization that Finga, our halfling wizard, could recast silence if she wanted to. And there's a moment at the table where there was actually like a meta conversation, a conversation above the table, about whether or not they wanted to see what was going to come through the ritual portal.
Oh, I love that.
And there was at least one player, if not two, who were like pretty adamant that they did not want that to happen. The rest of the table was like, let's let her rip, dude. Like, so she could have cast silence again, basically kind of moved the focal point of silence, and we would have kind of kludged it. I said, like, look, you can cast it again, and basically everybody's within near. Like, they're not spread out across the room. You can silence everybody. You could negate this for another round, essentially. What do you want to do? She decided, no, I'm good. Let's see what comes through. Did something else in her turn. Balor showed up, I think everybody was like, uh-oh. But it ended up being
just a little level 16 demon. It's no big deal.
It ended up being super fun, and I don't want to go through every single round of the combat, but the combat lasted about an hour, and that was with like lots of dynamic things happening, with interesting movement, and you can get pretty tactical in Shadowdark, even when you're doing kind of what we're doing, which is not using prescribed distances anymore.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy to have moved away from the prescriptive distance piece. Yeah. I find that as a kind of mechanical, I find it discordant with how I'm learning Shadowdark and seeing it evolve as I play it more and more. One of the common problems I think a lot of GMs run into, especially when talking about high level play and getting nervous about it, is the one versus many. So you had at some number at this point of the fanatics and the cultists running around, sure. And then the Balor shows up.
Oh yeah.
And do the party just like alpha strike the Balor? And this is also why you and I like that single initiative. Is it's not, when I say alpha strike, it's all players focus all attention on demon and kill it dead, and just my wargaming brain from tabletop wargaming, especially during the summer, I kind of revisit that hobby as I have more time to devote to it. That's a huge issue in any tabletop wargame, is how do you balance that issue out? So I know you didn't want to go through blow by blow, and that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in here really specifically is, did the party just suddenly focus fire on the Balor and just take it down, or were there still enough of the fanatics and cultists around that they were causing issues? Or like talk about the numbers game of 6th, 10th level PCs and a big bad out there, and how that played out.
So I really like to try and create dynamism in any combat scenario. So kind of leaving a lot of that out, but let me give you kind of a sense of what happened. So yeah, there were a couple weenies out there. The lovely part about this combat was that Animate Dead was used not once but twice, once during the combat and once directly after, to resurrect these two kind of the big berserkers. So we had one big berserker fighting on the same turn as Finga, our halfling wizard, and that was awesome to like have this undead corpse of this thing like cruising around and just wailing on the Balor. So I think that does actually bring up summoned. We'll get to this for sure.
Okay, yep.
But
okay.
But summoning and having additional things to do on your turn outside the context of just your character, asterisk, and kind of put a pin in that. But as far as your question about ganging up on a single monster, some of the smaller, the weenies, the level 4, the measly level 4 berserkers. They were still annoying. Like they were, a couple of them stuck around, and they also had this problem of like, one of our characters was maybe more interested in getting the tablet and getting out of there than actually fighting, and so there was some like inter-party conflict that we had talked about prior to the session that was kind of like playing out. So there were different things happening that split their focus and split their attention. But ultimately, yeah, if you have a demon in front of you, you're going to fight the demon. Now, there were some spells that they couldn't necessarily use, things like Wall of Force and stuff like that just weren't going to be super useful. Like Wall of Force is an incredibly powerful spell, and I think it represents one of those things that can be a quote-unquote encounter ender, like you were asking about before. But like, if you use Wall of Force in this room, you're basically going to trap your two melee characters that hopped into combat in with the demon. So there was what I think is important about encounter design and encounter balance and encounter kind of adjudication is trying to create situations where players have to make difficult choices. So, for instance, I had this Balor grab people and throw them against the wall. largely because the model I was using was actually a Demigorgon model, and it has like tentacles. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it can do that. Great. It's going to grab people and throw them against the wall. Or it's going to grab people and throw them into the ground or keep them kind of pinned or whatever. So there were lots of different options for me to create situations where, if you're in the hand of this demon and a lightning bolt comes through, it's going to hit both of you for sure, 100%. Right. So as a wizard, you can't, and they couldn't fireball, right? Because there's a bunch of people in the room and you're just going to fireball all of them. So AoE spells started to be, right? So you start to limit the ability to use these things when number one, you don't use prescribed and specific tactical distances, right? You don't allow the shaping of fireballs to be in a very specific location, just kind of a general area. And also you have your baddies do things that you'd want your players to do. Like, I want my players to fight unfairly. Well, it is a level 10 game. You darn well better believe I am also going to fight unfairly. There's 6 of them. There's 1 of me. The demon is going to grab you and pin you to the ground so you can't use lightning bolt, and then throw you against a wall for some extra damage to get you away from it, and then take 17 other attacks or whatever it does. So that's, I think what's beautiful about level 10, and I think the thing that I didn't fully realize going in, is that you can be super unfair and it's fun, not unsporting anymore. It just, you no holds barred, your tactical brain, your strategic brain, your just maximum fun and interesting and cool and flavorful brain. You just kind of let everything fall out of it, and you just start saying, I'm going to do this. And players are like, okay.
No, your level 16 greater demon can't.
Excuse me, I've looked up in the rules and it says that you cannot do that. And I'm just I'm sorry, dude. I don't care. And no one did that, by the way.
Sure.
But that's, I think, the beauty and the liberation of level 10 is you can also do things that are wildly unfair.
Well, and it's also cannot overstate, it feels like, the rules light nature of Shadowdark, that it gives you enough structure to make reasonable calls, but it doesn't get into well, that's not how grapple works. Anybody who played 3rd Ed just groaned. Before we move on, I do want to touch on one spell that I think is important to this encounter.
Sure.
Which is a tier 3 wizard spell called Magic Circle.
Ah, yes.
And your encounter design is clever here because it kind of works mostly.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty good.
Magic Circle is a spell that kind of drives me bonkers because players will always try and make by the way, for those of you who are listening who don't have Magic Circle in front of you, it basically allows you to negate damage or hostile effects from a certain type of enemy. Now, players are going to be like, I would like it to be any enemy that hates me. They're going to try and make it as broad as possible. I am always going to try and make it as specific as possible. In this case, if somebody would have cast Magic Circle, I would have considered this to have 3 combatants. There were the small level 4 dudes, the Berserkers, there were the beefed up Berserkers, and there was this Demon Valor. I would not have allowed a player to cast Magic Circle and just eliminate all of the Berserkers. It just, granted, that's probably how it's quote unquote supposed to work, but I find Magic Circle to be one of the few spells in Shadowdark that players see and leverage in a way that actually just saps the fun out of an encounter. And for that reason, I basically never, if I'm designing an encounter, I will never design an encounter that has only one kind of enemy as, almost ever, just because it's more fun to have multiple kinds of enemies, but also because Magic Circle exists. And it basically, if you're only fighting goblins and you cast Magic Circle, suddenly, as long as you're in the circle, no goblins can harm you for the duration of the effect. It's a focus spell, so bada bing, bada boom. But I find it to be one of the few spells in Shadowdark that can sap the fun out of an encounter. And here, no one tried to cast it because I think everyone recognized this is, it's a focus spell. And it doesn't cover the entire room, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think it's worth calling out. And, it's also, as I often like to do, is with the word type is not defined by the rules of Shadowdark. And we've seen this with weapon type, that there's some class abilities that call out a weapon type.
Rangers.
Right. And it's not super strictly defined. There is a category that says type, but that certainly doesn't seem to be the intention of the rule.
Is it melee or ranged, or is it actually like a longbow or a short sword, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah. So I think that's the just the point I want to call it is it's another great point where the GM is going to need to make some calls. And once you get up to a certain level, you do have to be thoughtful about what's available and what's out there. But let's go ahead and press forward. So eventually, spoilers not, they dispatch the Baelor, they get the tablet, and they move on to face whatever lies in the southern chamber.
That's right. And I mean, I'll say a couple things happen after this encounter that are pretty important. Number one, both of these sarcophaguses that had the minor tablets that you needed to put in the door, they were both trapped with like super high level disintegration traps, basically. And smartly, without a thief, they used one of the animated big beefy berserkers to open said sarcophagus. The big beefy berserker was killed by the trap, and they got the item inside the tablet without any issue. Second thing that happened is, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, is that after the first encounter, I rolled a random encounter, and then I rolled that the big bad of the dungeon showed up, a lich. They killed the lich, and I thought I had another round to kind of mess with them and then have him teleport away. I did not. And we'll talk a little bit about why later, because Dominion was cast and did a bunch of damage that I did not expect. So I just let it ride. They killed the big bad in a pretty ignominious way.
Wow.
And a few of the players already hated this dude because he'd like marked some of their fellow player characters and stuff. But I will come back to this for sure. There's a lot of stuff that I still want to get to, but this was a good example of, I thought I could outsmart the players. I thought it was going to be fun. I thought it'd be like kind of a little precursor, a little mini battle. It was not. They killed the guy, and you got to let it ride. So
the hollow tip here is, I'm slowly learning this, very slowly, is if I am running some kind of BBEG or boss that I don't want to get iced right away, but I'm putting it in front of the characters, and the thought enters my mind of like, should I run away now, or is it too early, or one more turn? That is your cue to leave now. Yeah. Get your big baddie out of there. The fact that it showed up at all has done the effect.
Yeah.
Get out.
Get him out.
Inevitably, 3 20s will be rolled by the players and story over. Yeah. But yeah, let's go ahead and press on to that southern room, because I know what's in there, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. So I all the same things. We covered a lot of the kind of the encounter based stuff in that first encounter discussion. The second encounter, the less said about it, the better. My hubris got the best of me. So this is like the third encounter, and really the final encounter, combat encounter of the session, was with an undead dragon and their Legion of Bone, which in last week's episode, we had Michael on. We talked about this a little bit. I said I used the Vampire Dragon and Legion of Bone from his zine, which again we'll plug, Creating and Adapting Monsters for Shadowdark RPG. I used the mini bestiary part, but the thing that I changed from the module in here, it was originally this is a huge cave space, and I made it very tight for a couple of reasons. Number one, I needed to make sure that I could get some breath weapony kind of stuff off, because that was going to be fun. I've never been able to use a dragon in Shadowdark, so I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. And also, frankly, I didn't have the bandwidth to or the models to run a large cavern situation. I just used all of the WizKids cavern tiles that I had in my entire collection, and that was the size of the room.
And thus the room was built.
Thus the room was built. So that it was awesome. The dragon hung out on the ceiling, dispatched one breath weapon, and then I tried to like swoop down and have it like accost one of the characters to try and drop one of the characters, and it got pretty close, and characters did drop in both these encounters, but there was never really, I don't think, a true fear of death. But what was really nice here is that we had a diversity of undead from the kind of Legion of Bone, flavored a little bit for this encounter, that were kind of making things really annoying. But it was just fun to run a dragon. Like, there were both dungeons and dragons in this session. And anytime you can kind of ham fist a dragon in, which it's in the module. But I was just excited to kind of, put a dragon on the table. I was like, boom, dragon.
Dragon put up a few rounds of fighting. It didn't get out.
Oh, yeah. No,
Okay,
it
cool.
didn't just get
It lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was probably too nice. And I don't mean that I was like making choices in the moment to be nice. I was trying to do something fun, and I should have probably just put the pedal to the floor and just, done a breath weapon after breath weapon after breath weapon after breath weapon from afar and just nuked all of the characters. It would have been totally unsporting and probably would have gotten close to a TPK, but that's probably what I quote unquote should have done instead of single target coming down and but it's an undead dragon and it could sap the life out of people, so it reduced maximum hit points by the amount of damage that it did on its bite attack. Just full stop. No, like boom.
This just happens now.
This just happens
That's
now.
one of my favorite parts of Shadowdark, actually, and this is how this works. And the players go,
Do I get to save? And I go, what is a save? I've never heard of a save before. So it was awesome. And I think that encounter ended up on the table. There were just models everywhere. There were status effects everywhere. There were people, coming under each other's control. And it was just fun. Like it was just one of those crazy, wild, wacky battles that you only get at level 10. I mean, you can certainly have them at lower levels, but just the amount of stuff going on was fun. The amount of success, like it's just fun to see characters succeed, especially after running games for low level characters and watching them, fail a lot of the time. When you're a level 10 character, you're probably going to succeed more than you fail at a lot of things, especially since you couple that with the fact that you continue to use if it's in your bailiwick, you automatically succeed unless there's time pressure or the threat of some kind of failure or whatever. Couple that rule with the way that dice work, and your level 10 fighters probably going to hit stuff more often than not,
and pretty hard usually. They
do
indeed. One thing, and I hit it real hard. It's I love that about fighters. What do? Smack that guy. Yes. Yeah. Well, that sounds like a huge success all around.
Totally.
You got to do the big things. There was not only a dungeon, there was also a dragon and a greater demon, which are kind of, in my mind, the biggies. But lest we rose-color oversell this whole thing, were there any hiccups? Again, people have a lot of fear about what if. You already kind of touched on, you took Wish out of the equation.
Sure.
Which is understandable, I think, here. I will shout out many old school modules, which I think is frankly even worse than just saying we're not using Wish. I would not have a problem if a GM just said, Wish doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not a spell you can use because I don't want to deal with it. I think that's totally within the GM's purview. Mm-hmm. And you can optimize the fun right out of the game with it. So I think that was a good call. I'm assuming that everything wasn't love, luck, and lollipops the whole way through, and everybody was high-fiving and cheering, and you were being the good sport, setting up the very stout mannequins to be knocked down. Did anything come up that was like, especially, you mentioned the menu, right? That characters now have, especially spellcasters, have a much longer menu of options. Did anything come up?
Yeah, so I'll just make brief mention that they killed my main baddie early.
Yeah.
Like, come on. That was a lich. It was supposed to be cool.
Yeah, I thought they were good. Apparently not as good as a greter demon or a vampire dragon.
Oh, well. But, hey, I would just say it's the hubris of the lich, not me, of course. I will say this. Here's actually something that I think maybe it will be surprising, is that one of the mantras of old school games is the answer isn't on your sheet, right? Think laterally or kind of think creatively to solve your problems. I think character sheet focused problem solving increases the higher level you get, especially if you're leveraging that learning downtime and characters start to get more complex. They start to know more languages. They start to, when you are a high level, you start thinking that you should be able to solve every problem, right? You're level 10. Damn it, this problem that's in front of me must be solvable. I'm a level 10 character. There must be a solution. Now, this wasn't a huge problem, but there was kind of a quote-unquote like riddle-ish puzzle where you had to jump into the abyss and basically die in order to reach the actual last room. So this is actually in Barrow Maze, spoilers, there is in order to get to one of the main MacGuffin rooms, the tablet room, you have to leap off into nothingness and basically die in order to reach the actual real tablet room from the fake tablet room. So I left that in there. I thought it was cool. They eventually got it, but there was, I think, a little bit of like hemming and hawing of, this can't possibly be the solution. Maybe there has to be another solution. A grappling hook got used, which is super fun to see level 10 characters still using a grappling hook to get across this chasm. Anyways, I think that is a little bit of a hiccup that maybe wouldn't be the case if you worked your way up to level 10, right? If there was a more natural progression. But if you just kind of throw the level 10 gauntlet down and say, like, we're going to play level 10 characters, I think you will see, especially wizard and priest characters, like looking to their sheets way more often for solutions just because they have lists of spells. So that was the first thing that kind of, I don't think it in all impacted the actual fun or kind of dynamism of the play. It didn't undermine anything. It's just something to consider.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. My wife and I were just talking about a recent session we all played, and she was surprised as she was looking at her character sheet, not that there weren't like answers and, super abilities and talents and things like that, but she was looking at her backpack gear list and was like, usually I have a lot weirder stuff that gives me the opportunity to come up with creative solutions. And she is playing a spellcaster. There was a number of extenuating factors in that session, but she was having some of that, and we weren't at 10th level yet, but had it been 10th level, I think she would have really been struggling.
Sure.
We're down at still, I think her character might be one of the higher levels at 3rd, and she was really struggling with that, looking for answers on the sheet. But that also comes with creative problem solving. I can, to just really echo what you said, if you're a priest or a wizard, you now have more spells, and you didn't have the organic learning process of, I know this spell will solve this problem, toolkit built up.
Yeah,
and I mean, I think that's unavoidable, especially if you're going to one-shot a level 10.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think a good call out that people are going to look to their sheets more at this level. Plus, the problems are weirder. See Vampire Dragon.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
that's a weirder problem.
The combat problems can certainly be solved with your sheet, right? In a kind of a roundabout way. So the only other thing, and this is kind of the last thing I want to shout out, that because honestly it was just a fun session, I think everyone should try level 10 play, is I just want to call out one spell that kind of did trip me up, and it is Dominion. It's a tier 5 priest spell. It lasts for 10 rounds. The range is near. And I'm going to read the spell, Jody, because I kind of want to have a brief conversation about adjudicating this spell. So, mighty beings come to your aid. The beings must have a combined total of 16 levels or less. Chaotic PCs summon demons/devils, and lawful or neutral PCs summon angels. The beings act of free will to aid you on your turn. After 10 rounds, they return to their realms. You cannot cast this spell again until you complete penance. So the reason I want to talk about this is twofold. Number one, the player who cast this in my game summoned an archdevil, which is a level 16 devil. Chaotic player character, great. And I didn't really read the spell. I just kind of asked them how it worked. And archdevil's level 16, great. It's under the level cap. There's two things here. First of all, the spell specifically calls out in basically throughout the entire spell, everything is pluralized, right? So I want to get your thoughts on that. I actually think it's better that there was just one summoned creature because I find summoning to be bad. I just do not like extra things, retainers, summoned beings, whatever. But that aside, the spell specifically is in the plural. And then it also says they act of their own free will, which to me, looking back, says that I should have been the one who was determining what this extra planier thing is doing. And in reality, what happened at the table was that the player was like piloting both their character and this archdevil, which meant that it was doing things that were like strategically and tactically optimal in many ways, and I think was used rather well. But it also ended up making it so that this was just essentially another player character. And this thing has 4 attacks that do 3d10 damage each. And it has Soulbind, which was also used. So to me, there was like that is the only part of the entire session that left a bad taste in my mouth. So I kind of wanted to throw it to you of, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are your thoughts on a player using a spell perhaps incorrectly, or at least, I didn't check the spell. I trust the player, and I have no reason to not trust them. But it was, looking back, it was like, woof, that changed, especially that encounter with the dragon and the Legion of Bone. It would have been a lot harder and I think a lot more dynamic if this specific spell was used in a different way. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of have a lot of thoughts about this. So I'm going to kind of work through them. And yeah. So the first line, I'm just going to kind of try and take them in order. It is plural throughout the spell. However, much like I called out, Magic Circle says a type of monster, and you could say monsters with eyes. Okay, that the GM has to make a call there. So whether you choose to have the spell Dominion be enforced as a plural, multiple things get summoned, or it is being parenthesis S, and you're interpreting that it's one or many.
Yeah.
That's up to you. Thankfully, this is a tier 5 pre-spell. So, you can just, you're not going to see a ton of this, but It is worth keeping in mind. Also, man, it sure feels like a ritual could be cast or something at a lower level to try and do exactly this. This could be the spell that is the result of the ritual or whatever. So I think that part of it is just a GM. You need to make a call and be consistent with your call.
Agreed.
The part that says the being's act of free will. Yeah, that I'm in alignment with you. That says the GM is in control of this critter, and it will act in a way the GM feels is appropriate because that it's going to act of its own free will. And this takes me kind of to the next step is you are not a huge fan of alignment as a mechanic. It isn't something you find terribly useful.
I'm learning to deal with it. I mean, I'm going to have to. It's in the game. It's a part of the Western Reaches. So I gotta. But yes, on all told, alignment's not my favorite thing.
So this spell, the part that calls out alignment to me is really the important part because it's setting up an opposition between demons and devils and angels, and that those forces of law and chaos are going to have issue. And in the case of a mixed alignment party, that might not run totally smoothly.
Sure.
And, I've referenced it a few times in this episode, this is anecdotal, but when I was a young lad learning to play Warhammer 40,000, I had this really lovely, I say older, but I was in my teens and he was in his mid 20s. And he kind of took me under his wing and taught me the game. And we would play games, and he would kind of teach me how it worked at our local game store, and was just a really cool guy. And about, our 4th or 5th game, he kind of stopped mid-game and was like, hey, man, like, I am happy to show you the game and I like playing with you, but it's your job to know your rules. And admittedly, this was a one-shot. So, people are going to miss stuff. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of combatants. But I do feel that when I'm a player at a table, it is my responsibility to make sure I am accurately representing as best I can, and I'm not in any way saying like there was malicious intent or they were trying to get one over.
No.
Nothing like that. But I do take that onus, and the trade-off is we're not going to stop and read every spell line for line while we're playing, because I can just trust that my players are always going to make the call into the, not to their detriment, but like if there is something I need to know, they'll let me know. And if I'm going to make a call, they'll help me out with that, because I am monitoring. In this instance, you were monitoring 6 other people plus all the monsters plus the narrative. The player can monitor the spell and make sure that it's to the best of their ability accurate. And it, you and I have a little bit of a sports background, and this is kind of where I'll end it is anytime you watch a sporting event and in retrospect, you're discussing what the referees did, it just is like, man, that's a bummer. Like, we're talking about the call the ref made. We're not talking about the amazing play a player made. And having a rules misalignment during a game, especially when, at level 10, things are high stakes and the monsters are bigger and the numbers are bigger, and the numbers are bigger makes it feel like the stakes are higher, even if they are statistically percentage-wise pretty much the same old same. It just feels bigger. And so to have a moment where you're reflecting and going, oh man, that ruling didn't play out quite how it should have. Bummer. And it stinks it stinks for a player when that happens. If the GM made a call that didn't match their expectation, it stinks for the GM if a player used an ability and then later you see like, oh, that's not how that ability was supposed to work, like in this case. So that's kind of the stack as I see it that happened there. And it's one of those kind of classic problems. But you know what? I think that takes us through your level 10 experience. So let's hear from our sponsors and then come back and see what our takeaways are.
This episode of Dungeon Master Diaries is sponsored by Adventurer's Greens, because surviving on jerky and dry biscuits isn't exactly a wellness plan. Look, we've all been there. Day 3 in the dungeon, everything smells like mold and undeath, and your last vegetable was... It's a good question. Your joints ache, your energy's tanked, and your gut is doing things best left unspoken around the campfire. Enter Adventurer's Greens. It's a single scoop of powdered fungi and herbs. Nothing fancy, just real nutrients for your body you've been begging for since you left civilization behind. Toss it in a water skin, stir it into ale, or eat it straight if you're feeling bold. Either way, keeps you regular, focused, and slightly less likely to take con damage. Packed with vitamins, minerals, and the kind of clean, whole food ingredients that you want. Your average trail ration can't even dream of. Adventurer's Greens is how you stay sharp when the torchlight's low and the next room smells like goblin breath. Try it out now with a free starter satchel, a collapsible camp mug, and a shot at feeling like yourself again. Use code NODOWNTIME at checkout to receive this special offer. Adventurer's Greens. Real fuel for real crawlers.
All right, let's bring this topic into the light with a little bit of a core takeaway from this discussion. Matt, kick us off. What you got in reflection?
All right, so I want to say that like combat encounters, both, this is what I obviously have the most experience with in terms of level 10 Shadowdark, but I think they end up feeling a lot more like 5th edition, and I think this is actually good. I think if your players can level into a more, if not tactical, just dynamic and maybe more, even more drawn out combat encounter scenario where even as a GM, you're prepping combat encounters, you're like putting them together and kind of, maybe if not balancing them, you're at least thinking about the combatants in an interesting and thoughtful way. Super fun. And I don't think it has to be like that, but I do think it actually wants for something that's maybe a little bit more 5e-ified.
Yeah, couldn't agree more that I am finding in my own GMing, I am less interested in designing for first and second level and really like looking ahead to like, man, I got to level you guys up because I got to get some, I want to get some bigger baddies out there. And I'm just going to echo with my first takeaway is exactly what you said. The higher the level, the more as a GM, you probably want to consider doing some prep. Think about, as we talked about, the spells and how they're going to interact with the world. And it may not be appropriate any longer to throw just one type of critter at them. It's a room full of goblins. Hey, if they have fireball, goodbye goblins, and moving on. It was 20 of them and they all fit in the room. Well, they're all gone. Not a great encounter. And now you got to think through those things a little bit more. So a little bit higher level, a little bit higher prep, I think is a fair, paradigm. And those of you who are roll it and find out, you keep doing you.
All right. So my second and final takeaway is actually not a takeaway from the show. It's just a recommendation. And my takeaway is you should definitely play a level 10 one-shot if you feel like it would be fun for you and your group. And if you want to do that and you want to roll brand new characters, if you don't have characters that have kind of been around and you can level them up and give them one last foray, then I highly recommend Gels' Starting Wealth at High Levels table. There is a thread that we will put in the show notes on our Discord. Gels is the resident kind of mathematics crunch dude on the Discord and has developed a way of thinking about starting wealth if you want to start at higher levels than just level 1 or level 0.
Ooh, always love a level 0. And that sets me up for my last takeaway as I turn us away from level 10. Consider those tiers of play. Do you want to run some level 0s? Do you want to do those opening 3-ish levels and really see what's going on there? Do you like that mid-tier? Do you want to go to level 10? If you don't want to go to level 10, you don't have to. You can still tell an epic story. You just got to give them the big end early. But speaking of the end, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future episode. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us via YouTube or Facebook, or best of all, on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this episode show notes. Until next time, keep it epic.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.